Good evening.
Evening, and welcome to Deep Space Wine, where we discuss the wonders and horrors of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time. I am Kat, and I'm watching Deep Space Nine for the very first time, so I'm coming at it from a 21st century perspective, while Tim also lives in the 21st century, but has loved the show for many years, and will be bringing his deeper knowledge of Trek lore. Today's episode is the fourth Deep Space Nine episode to air on January the 25th, 1993. In terms of content warnings for the episode and our discussion, it's heavily centered around viral illness, which is a difficult subject for many of us at the moment. And the characters are often visibly distressed while being unable to communicate with those around them. So I will hand over to you, Tim, for an episode summary.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kat. So this was originally aired in North America on January 25th, 1993. It is Babel. And a quick plot summary will now follow, just to bring everyone up to speed. So, an overworked Chief O'Brien is trying to repair numerous malfunctions throughout the station, including most of the station's food replicators. He unknowingly activates a device hidden in one of the replicators. Shortly afterwards, O'Brien begins showing signs of aphasia. He becomes unable to speak coherently or comprehend spoken language. Lieutenant Dax soon becomes aphasic as well, and Dr. Bashir discovers that aphasia is caused by a virus in the food created by replicators on the command level ops. Oh, my mic is quiet. Allow me to dial myself up a little and bring my microphone a little bit closer to me. Sorry, everyone, and thank you for the chat. Thank you, chat, for letting me know. So, where were we? So, yes. People all over the station begin showing signs of infection. In addition to aphasia, the virus causes a dangerously high, potentially deadly fever in its victims. The station is placed under quarantine to keep the virus from spreading. Doesn't this sound eerily familiar? Odo discovers that the bartender Quark has been selling food from a replicator in an occupied room on the command level, resulting in the contaminated food being spread all over the station. The virus then mutates to become airborne, endangering the entire population of the station. As part of her investigation, Major Kira soon finds a module in the last replicator O'Brien worked on. Bashir discovers that this module wrote the aphasia virus into the molecular pattern of any food being replicated. Bashir determines that the virus was engineered by a Bajoran terrorist during the time of the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. The doctor who created the virus is long dead following Kira's ongoing investigation, but one of his fellow resistance fighters, Cermak Wren, is now the administrator at a Bajoran hospital. Kira believes Dr. Cermak may have knowledge of the virus, so she decides to bring him to DS9. At first, Sisko refuses to allow Kira to leave, but she assures him she will not break quarantine. Kira flies to Bajor and transports Cermak directly to her runabout. Initially, Cermak refuses to help, but relents when Kira reveals that by being aboard the runabout, Cermak is also infected with the aphasia virus. Meanwhile, virtually the entire crew of DS9 is incapacitated. A freighter captain, desperate to avoid infection, tries to leave DS9 without clearance and ruptures his ship's power core in the process. To prevent the resulting explosion from destroying half the station, the ship must be ejected from its dock. Odo recruits Quark, who is unaffected by the virus, to assist him in jettisoning the ship, and it explodes at a safe distance. Cermak is eventually able to create an antidote for the aphasia virus, managing to treat all infected members of the crew, and thankfully incurring no fatalities. Thus summing up the episode.
Woohoo! Well done. That was a very smart, fast summary. Nicely done.
Somebody else wrote it. I won't lie. I tried to do my own summary, and I figured if somebody else writes it and I just read it, it's probably going to be easier for everyone.
There's no need to reinvent the wheel. You delivered it very well.
Thank you kindly, Kat. So, Kat, I feel like this is one of our very first, very standard Star Trek bottle disaster style episodes. What did you think?
Yeah, definitely. It's the first, I think I've described it as a Monster of the Week episode. We haven't got a lot of plot building going on. There isn't a lot of different trajectories for characters happening after this episode. It's just thing comes aboard the station, thing gets solved. Yay, reset. But yeah, nonetheless, I think it's done very well. And yes, in terms of the kind of the amount of stuff that it deals with. It's got an A plot, which is the virus being aboard the ship,
Yes.
the B plot, which is Quark needing the replicator fixed in his bar,
Yes.
and the B plot feeds the A plot. They get mashed together, and
It
it's all
does.
the same thing. It's just so efficient.
It does actually. It's very tight and contained. You know, things happen
Yes.
very quickly, and as you say, it all very much feeds together. It's a very, very bottle episode. Everything that happens, you know, within like a few rooms ops the infirmary and underneath the replicator. So
Yes, you're right. It's all about a problem contained within the station, and as we've noted before, they cannot leave to resolve it, apart from Kira, who dashes out very quickly, kidnaps somebody, and then comes back with no repercussions.
what a yes, no repercussions as well, but it is a wonderfully Kira-esque solution, which is, damn it, I'm just going to steal someone right out of their office, expose them to a virus, and then they'll help us.
Kira and those out there solutions.
Yes, 100%. I will say good evening to Nigel and the indoor cat in the chat there. Thanks so much for joining us. So,
another thing I noted about this episode, it is the start of the suffering of Miles O'Brien. I've been told this is effectively the subject of Deep Space Nine, is how much the Irishman can be tormented. And this episode starts with him extremely tired, trying to fix numerous technical problems all over the station. And at the end of the episode, that's pretty much where he still is. Everyone's shouting at him to fix everything.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right. Not only is this the beginning of O'Brien's descent into torment, but it is actually also a running storyline, which is that Deep Space Nine is not a Federation starbase, you know, spick and span and shiny and up to date. It is an old, I think we learn later on that it's already about 20 years old, and it was obviously not well looked after by the Cardassians, largely sabotaged when they left, and they're trying to get a lot of Federation stuff to work with it now, so keeping Deep Space Nine just running is a long-running problem that comes up in this episode and will come up in further episodes. So you're right that it goes back, you know, the status quo returns at the end of the episode, but more than that, it doesn't go away. It's not resolved. It is a problem that crops up in later episodes. So yeah, it is the beginning of the torment of O'Brien and the torment of trying to keep Deep Space Nine running. So for those of you joining us, Kat and I, we basically wander our way through the plot. We've made notes as we've watched along, and we'll just make our way through the episode as we go. So I would jump in and say I noticed in the opening scenes there's a lot of technobabble, which I love. You know, these nonsense Star Trek words. And there was a lot of realigning the primary phase inverters and all of that.
It's wonderful, and I think we'll come to it later, but I think that the use of a lot of technobabble in this episode supports the plot quite well.
It does, absolutely does. It makes you feel like, yeah, these are trained professionals, scientists and engineers using their intellect to solve a problem, which I love. The particular bit that stood out to me was when Dax asked O'Brien to come down and help her with the lab. And he walked in and suggested various fixes, and Dax was like, no, I've tried all of these. And we think, oh, turns out Dax is also, as well as being a science officer, a very competent engineer, which I quite liked. It was such a tiny little bit of character building, but you're like, you know, it's not like TNG where you would have to get Geordi to fix everything. Geordi can walk in and somebody else will be like, well, no, I know how to fix things as well. And I really liked it. And then obviously O'Brien stopped the I think it was a noise. Was it like a really piercing noise? Or
Yeah, it was an electric noise that was just going on in the background while she was trying to work.
The lights go out, and he's like, anything else I can do for you? That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And I also liked, just prior to that scene, you've got the captain who comes back later, Raheel, the guy who desperately wants to get his ship off the station because he's got a shipment of goods that are going to expire. So I liked that they put him in early, partly because he comes back later, and when his ship is going to blow up, it's not a surprise. We know that he's desperate to leave the station. But it also supports that the kind of two-sidedness of Deep Space Nine. You've got the core crew, the people who live there, work
Yes.
there, the characters we see time and time again, and you've got the many people who pass through. So it was nice to see that you've got him. You've also got a group of, I can't remember what race they were, but a group of people stuck in an airlock that O'Brien is trying to save. They've been stuck in there for several hours. So it's just nice that you've got the normal crew members coming up and asking him for help, and also loads of people who are coming through and don't want to be delayed.
Yes, I once again, it's something we've touched on in previous episodes, but it's world building. It's reminding you that it's not like the Enterprise, which was very self-contained, and if somebody new came on board, it was a big deal. DS9 is a port, and people are constantly passing through it all the time. So,
and they're business people. It's not just diplomats who are there to see one of the important characters. They're people carrying out trades. They're people with jobs. They're people who don't have any patience for Miles O'Brien not fixing things on the double.
Poor O'Brien. Yes, 100%. Yes, they're not polite Starfleet people who would be patient and understanding. They are very impatient, non-Starfleet people. And again, that reminds you, this is not The Next Generation. This is a different show with different things happening. I do like O'Brien's muttering to himself where he wants to sign on to a drone freighter. No people, no complaints. I just thought, oh man, I want that on a mug. That's great. No people, no complaints. I love that.
Bless his heart.
Let's head on to the bar. Quark's is very, very, very quiet. There's only one customer in, and Odo, who clearly just likes to hang out at the bar when he's not got work. You know, just so
he just comes and bothers Quark for something to do.
That's what he does to pass the time. He's in there just gloating over Quark's quiet time, and then
yeah, I really enjoy that scene. There's a good bit of frenemy banter between Odo and Quark. Odo pretending that he'd be delighted if Quark's bar closed, when really you just know he'd be absolutely gutted. Yeah, I think even Quark points out in that scene, what would you do? You'd have to find some other innocent to torment.
It's absolutely
Those two characters who are kind of bound together by enmity, but actually really rely on each other.
Once again, you know, a reminder for everyone in chat, and yeah, Izzy there pointing out that Odo does need Quark. This is the beginning of a wonderful, wonderful, complex relationship. But yes, we are absolutely going to find that they are very codependent, mutually, requiring of each other's company. And I do like that is demonstrated later on when Quark's customer is very unimpressed with the quality of his stew and starts feeding it to Quark. And Odo's like, all right, I think he's had enough. Lets him feed him one more mouthful and then is like, no.
Drags him away.
And then drags him away. But gives him
I was also very impressed that they had two actors in full alien face makeup, and both of them consumed food on camera. There was there didn't look to be any cutting away to replace makeup. No, you can't put. And it was stew. It was stew with noodles. It looked really messy, and there was no timidity about doing that. The makeup crew knew what they were doing.
100%.
Just that was really nice.
It is on a show which occasionally falls down on its representation of alien races with just, you know, bumpy foreheads. It is actually quite impressive to see that kind of creativity. And you're right. I think both Quark and I've forgotten the character's name, but he
was eating curly and stew, but I can't remember where he was from or what his name was. But yeah, and he had a kind of heavily made up chin. Yes. He had lots of little spikes on his lower face, so they also haven't shied away from adding latex and building up that part of his face before covering it with noodles. It's great.
No, they look fantastic. I'm very glad at that. Obviously, Quark then realizes he has to find a replicator that will put out decent stew. And he asks the computer for access to all the repaired replicators, and the computer says, well, no, you need security clearance for this. What does Quark do? He goes
to his little box where he keeps lots of little gadgets that give him security clearance, which again is really nice economic world building. It's not I have to find a way around it. This is something he does every single day. He just asks the computer for what he needs. It tells you that about the character. It tells you that about how the computer works.
And it happens in the blink of an eye, and it feels so natural. It's like, oh, wow, Quark is just absolutely straight up going to hack the computer. And he has
Yeah.
no hesitation. Wow. Very,
And it's
normal
wonderful 'cause-
Quark things.
Yeah. And then it shows us on the screen that he can see which replicators have recently been fixed. So plot-wise, you've also got, he knows where they are, he knows how he can get to them.
100%.
Plot progresses in a matter of seconds. Beautiful.
It's very stripped down. This episode moves very quickly, I notice. And I think that's something we'll find as we go along.
It does, and I think it doesn't do it at the expense of character.
No.
Everyone is still very much richly themselves while the plot is bouncing along a pace.
I'm glad you thought so, because I know some of the criticisms of this episode were it's very generic Star Trek. People just
really?
seem to go through the motions a bit. Now, I didn't feel that, but possibly because these characters are so new, we're still seeing like, this is what they're like in a crisis. This is interesting. This is what they're like when they're actually really out of themselves. Their reactions when they realize they're losing their ability to speak is really, I found it really powerful. You could see like the concern on their faces. So I thought it was well done.
I thought so.
The next scene I have made a note of is Dax and Kira walking down the promenade, and lots of passers-by, lots of men stopping to compliment Kira and Dax, two very attractive young women. And I like that Kira was very brusque and businesslike nods, and Dax, in an interesting bit of character development, says, I haven't been a woman for 80 years. Very interesting. Her previous host before Curzon was a woman, and she enjoys the attention from men. Which
yes, I think Kira says you must find the attention wearying or something, and she says, no, actually, I quite enjoy it. Which I think there's a little bit of inconsistency in Dax's character in this scene, because was it just last episode or the one before where she was getting fed up with Bashir constantly hitting on her?
Precisely what I was going to observe. Yes, so I think I did mention that last episode as well. This is a bit a representation of how the writers are still kind of finding their feet, and it's like, actually, perhaps we don't want to make Dax this aloof alien. Perhaps we want to make them a bit more social. So you're right, it is a bit of a jarring contrast.
But yes, also in that scene, again, the previous episode, we've had Dax insisting to Cisco, you should only eat steamed asthma, it's really good for you. This episode, she's like, I'll have pudding, why not? Yay, bring on the pudding. What was it, double whipped Edanian spice pudding?
Didn't that sound so good?
It was one episode ago, guys, come on. I don't know, I think she's just feeling a bit more excited about life this week than last.
I think that's it. Maybe she's being more confident, and therefore finding her feet. And you might also say that the writers are feeling more confident and finding their feet.
And it's possible that she's now moving more into being Jadzia than being Curzon. She's gradually shedding the elderly man that she previously was.
I think that's an
becoming
excellent
a bit
observation. More. I think you're absolutely right. So my next note is when we see O'Brien start to lose language. And what I found quite compelling was how convincing it was. And a credit to Colm Meaney, the actor, that his language and inflection was still, I'm trying to communicate with you, but the words were obviously very nonsensical. And I found it really compelling that I found it very believable that he was really trying his hardest to communicate, and just the words that were coming out were not connected.
I think you're right. It's really well done. He does a great job as the first person who suffers with it. And the fear and the frustration that he experiences when he suddenly can't make the people around him understand him. And I think the script was very well written in terms of the word choices. I think they hit a nice balance between the poetic, the ridiculous, and the actors they carry that. They memorized a lot of phrases that make zero sense.
What I thought. It can't have been easy.
No, and it was all scripted rather than extemporized, rather than made up on the spot, because there is a scene a bit later when he has been trying to write something into an electronic pad that he's holding. Bashir wants to find out whether he can communicate in written language rather than in spoken. And he starts repeat the words that he's written down. He repeats to them in a slightly different order. He's clearly trying to communicate exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and it's the same words. Exactly.
I really like that. There's a sense that if they had time to sit down each individual who had the virus, they could just work out what the word swap is, because each word has been swapped for another in the language.
That's
But they don't have time for that.
That's the problem. It's a shame, because yes, that actually would have been a quite novel solution, but yes, for the for the conduct of a running 45-minute, 50-minute, action TV show, we possibly wouldn't have loads of time for a kind of phonetic discussion, which is a shame, because it would have been quite interesting.
It would have. It's also interesting that the universal translator couldn't adapt to it quickly. The universal translator just uses the words as they are spoken rather than the intention behind the words, which is, it probably speaks more to the inconsistency of how the universal translator works than the actual mechanics of it. But it's interesting, because we don't often encounter language problems, at least in TNG and in Deep Space Nine. You've obviously got the Dharma Congelat at Tanagra episode of TNG. But otherwise, language is just kind of, it's just universal. Everyone can understand one another. It's not going to be a problem.
You would think.
So, yeah, so it's quite unusual to have an episode like this where language is the primary difficulty they're facing.
Yeah, very interesting, and it actually helps. It's helpful to create a bit of tension and put them on the back foot, because something they would automatically rely on, like the translator, no longer an option. You literally cannot. You cannot get past this thing now. You have to improvise as best you can. And I did like that. If I recall, what Brian wrote on that pad was a little bit dramatic and.
It is. I've got it written down if you want to hear it.
Please, that would be wonderful.
What he wrote down on the pad was: flame the dark true salt, way link complete, strike limits victory frosted wake, simple hesitation. And when he's showing this to Bashir and speaking to him, he says, strike limits flame the dark true salt, victory strike limits frosted wake, simple hesitation. Enraged, he's trying his hardest here, and they're just not listening, not able to understand him, and it's great.
I love it. I love it, and I think there's actually some wonderful imagery in there. And I would have, if I had heard that at a poetry recital, I'd be like, wow, that's really compelling.
This is moving.
It
is really nicely done.
Yes, thank you so much for catching that. I was just thinking, I meant to find what he wrote on the pad. So thank you, Kat. Excellent work.
Yeah, I wrote down some of the other phrases he said, which I'll say now just because they are delightful.
Please.
I think one of the first things he says to Kira is, Major, lark's true pepper. Let birds go further loose, maybe. Shout easy play. Round the turbulent quick.
Round the turbulent quip. I loved that one.
It's wonderful. It's been written so that to someone who didn't know any English at all, it sounds like fluent spoken English. It's not juddering, it's not stuttery, it's not a problem with speech production itself. It's very clearly the words that are wrong, despite sounding like a fluent spoken language. It's just so nice.
That's what I found that incredibly believable and immersive. It was so easy to believe that O'Brien is trying to say something, but the words that are coming out are wrong, but everything else is right. So, I found it a little bit unsettling in that kind of slightly uncanny valley style. This
it really is. And I think in terms of empathizing, imagining yourself in that situation, it is very distressing thinking about being surrounded by people and you're communicating the only way you know how, and no one around you can understand, and you can't understand them. Yeah, it's a really nice choice for a problem for the crew to solve.
Absolutely is. And what I liked then as a counter is that they're talking about it around the little table in ops, and Cisco says to Dax, you're going to have to lead on investigating this, and she looks tired, and she looks at him, and she just goes, I don't think I can. And then just the words change, and you're like, oh wow, this thing has struck somebody else right here, right in front of us, and you're like,
midway through a sentence, she says, I'm sorry, Benjamin, I'm unable to foolish assembled regal weather control.
Wow, amazing, Kat, you speak aphasia, amazing.
But yes, I love it. It's genuinely frightening that happens, and I think that's during the conversation in which they realise that it is spreading further on the ship. But at this point in my notes, I wrote quarantine in big bold letters, because They know there's a problem. Okay, when you've only got one person and he's struggling with a problem, which, as Bashir says, normally follows a brain injury. It's
Yes.
normally something that happens after someone has been struck on the head. So there's no reason to assume that anyone else is going to encounter this. But by the time you've got 2 people, 3 people, many people, the crew relies on the viral controls in the transporters, which are meant to screen out
That's right.
any viruses, germs, etc.
That's right.
And on the replicators, which are meant in their programming to sanitize the food. It all comes out perfectly clean and safe to eat. So in terms of air filtration, masks, keeping your distance from each other, which we're all far more aware of than we used to be, admittedly. There's just nothing in place. They're sitting talking to each other about how a virus has become airborne, and not one of them goes, "Oh, we should go back to our quarters and do this over vid screen."
No. There was I think they've been lulled into a false sense of security, despite obviously how many times this has happened on The Next Generation, and how many times it happened in the original series, and how many times it'll happen on Voyager. A certain amount of irresponsibility kind of has to happen just to move the plot along. But they do eventually send people to quarters and lock down the station. And my next note is...
As far as they're able to.
Say again?
As far as they're able
as
to, because we soon find that Quark considers his bar to be essential services.
I've written
and
a note
remains
here.
open.
Terrible lockdown memories of what constitutes an essential services.
Yeah, what the government considers.
Oh, that's a good point from Izzy as well. Yeah, obviously the station is a contained environment, and when the virus does become airborne, when it mutates, it's like oh. So the best we can do is now keep everyone who's here from leaving, which obviously later becomes a plot point, and stop anyone from approaching, which is probably the best thing they can do. But yes, the sight of that busy, clustered bar with people carrying on as though there was, nothing to worry about, very, very reminiscent of a lot of denial and kind of irresponsible behaviour I think we would recognise from 2020 onwards, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we do wonder how Quark is keeping his bar patrons supplied, and we find out that in my notes I have that Quark is going to quarters in the command level where the affected replicators are, and he is unlocking doors with another one of his clever gadgets. Which
and I
love.
think it's Odo who catches him at it.
By being a trolley. I love it. Just stop assuming that everything around you isn't suddenly going to turn out to be Odo. I mean, people just underestimate him.
Criminals aboard the station will be mildly traumatized by that. You think you're absolutely alone, and suddenly you've got a piece of furniture morphing into a humanoid figure beside you. It's horrifying.
It is actually, isn't it? I mean, it's very effective from a crime-fighting point of view, but also, a little bit, quite a lot actually unsettling that anything. And they do play with that later on in the show as well. They're like, "Oh my God, Odo could be anything." But for here, it's played for laughs,
It is, and Odo is, he's less harsh on Quark than he might be. Had he caught anyone else doing that, he says it's a criminal offence.
It's a criminal
accessing crew quarters without express permission, and he just lets him off because he's his friend, really, and he likes him and he needs him to stay around. Need him to stay around committing crimes, so he's got something to do.
Oh dear me! Then
it's lovely. It's a very nice, different male friendship from that between Garak and Bashir, and the show supports both of them. They're extremely different relationships. It's just nice that it's got that. Yeah, it's nice that it has those close, peculiar friendships between men, rather than it always being, if they're going to have anything ongoing, it's got to be a male and a female character, which I think in TNG that was more often the case. There are male friends. You've got Geordi and Data who hang out a lot.
They have a great relationship.
But I think this show, it feels as if they're building more relationships between more characters more quickly, and I do especially like Odo and Quark's relationship in all of its humour.
So glad to hear you say that. There is so much to come, Kat, but no spoilers, please. Chat. Kat has all this. We want to preserve Kat's experience of the show because they've never seen it before. So this is all,
The only innocence I still have left is regarding the plot of Deep Space Nine.
Well, listen, no judgments here. Anybody can be as innocent as they want. No judgments here. But absolutely, yes.
Oh, I also remember, sorry, in the scene where Quark apprehends, where Odo apprehends Quark using the replicator, he says that he was tipped off when Quark said that Rom had fixed his own replicators in the bar, and Odo says that Rom's an idiot. He couldn't fix a straw if it was bent.
I love that line.
Which is fair. Rom is not shown as being the brightest penny, bless him.
It's an excellent line, and I did make a note of it, but I will say it is a case of early installment weirdness. And I will say no more. But it is interesting to say that Rom will be developed in a way that I think no other Star Trek show does. The cast of DS9 with all supporting characters is going to become huge, but we have all that to look forward to. Yes, I love that line. Couldn't fix a straw if it was bent. Love that. And then...
I was also interested when it turns out that it's the replicators that are at fault, and that the replicators normally screen out mold, bacteria, etc. It got me thinking about are there exceptions made for fermented foods? What about yogurt and Yakult and blue cheeses? Would there have to be exceptions built into it to get around those things? And also, does it know the anatomy of the user? Or are we assuming that all humanoids share the same quirks in terms of food? Izzy mentioned in the chat earlier about eating gach, which is more of a challenge for made-up actors because gach is usually served live and wriggling. But we have to assume that some species eat things and want things from the replicator that would not be safe for others to consume. So do you know whether that's ever addressed? Whether the replicator is able to gauge the anatomy of the consumer?
I don't. I believe the writers wanted some wiggle room.
That's perfectly reasonable. You can't spend every episode figuring out how people's lives work.
Exactly. Quite simply so that they didn't put borders around themselves to prevent them writing in something. I believe the implication that was cut from this episode is that the virus introduced is built into the generation of the food. So it's not screened out by these filters because it's seen by the computer to be an ingredient in the food and not a problem.
Yes, there was a lovely bit of, let's see if I can find it. There was a great bit of speech where someone described how it gets into it. Let's have a look. Yes. Kira finds the module in the pattern generator of the replicator that O'Brien has been working on. She says, according to Bashir, it introduced an anomalous programming sequence into the materialization subroutine, which is great because it's actually a meaningful bit of science jargon. It means that they was adding a DNA sequence to every item that it materialized, that it produced. And she follows, in effect, it built the virus directly into the replicated food at a molecular level, which is, it's nice. It's very neat.
And it kind of makes sense within the rules of the show and the universe. It's not putting something nasty. It's simply introducing a bit of extra DNA, which later recombines to become something nasty. So you're kind of catching the computer out. It doesn't.
Yes, it's using exactly the same material, but because it's putting it in a particular construct that interacts badly with the brain. Yeah, it's great. Really cunning.
I liked it as well. I thought it was quite a clever little plot.
It is. I think although at this point with a bit of jargon introduced, one thing I was sad was missing from it is that every time someone comes down with the virus, it becomes clear very, very quickly from what they're saying.
Yeah.
They're saying things like ankle try sound, reset gleaming, and dinner to bug. Whereas you could have had a character saying some of this jargon and have everyone else go, oh no, you too. And I was like, no, the materialization subroutine was broken.
No, those are actually the words I meant to speak.
Exactly. You could just have had a character using their day-to-day jargon and had everyone else go, oh no, but they didn't. They either didn't have time or just didn't find that as funny as I do.
I would have found it funny, but I can imagine, they possibly cut it for reasons of time and also possibly reasons of comprehension. Not everybody approaches this show with the same level of razor-sharp insights that they and me approach it with, unfortunately.
Everyone wants it to be a sitcom, basically.
You're absolutely right. And there is a slightly sitcom moment when Jake Sisko, Benjamin's son, comes down with it, and I found once again, Avery Brooks' portrayal of Cisco as a father, worried about his son, very, very convincing. I mean, really, really believable.
It's lovely. The way he puts his arm around him, he holds his head and kisses it. He's only just been told that the virus has become airborne, so he rushes face to face with his ill son and kisses him. But it's lovely. It's a beautiful, warm and realistic portrayal of a parent concerned for their child. But yes, there's a great comedy moment a short while after that when you've got Quark shouting words, and for a moment I thought they'd adapted the virus and the way it works for Quark, because what he shouts is food, Dabo, drinks, money, hand, mine, give, and someone does come up to him and say, oh no, not you, and he goes, oh, you underestimate the Ferengi. It's Cisco who does. He says, you underestimate the Ferengi immune system command. He's just there to make sure that the customers of his that are in the new built hospital are not trying to fake it to get away from paying their bills. Which feels very weird.
An establishing character moment there with Quark literally shaking down the sick for their money. We always think, oh, he's a rapscallion, that Quark, but also no, he is quite a harsh man. He is,
and I think especially in this instance where the viral spread was his fault. He's made these people unwell. If he had followed protocol, then a very small number of people would have become ill. They would have tracked down the problem more quickly because he broke protocol and introduced food from one replicator into the mainstream.
You make such a good point. And once again, as you've observed in previous episodes, there will be no repercussions for this. It's just swept.
Nil kill everyone, Quark. Well done.
Oh, good you. Guys, no. I mean,
I don't think he ever reckons with that. No one actually comes up to him and says, look, this is why it happened. Quark, do you not realise the significance?
No, exactly. They do not. They do not. Once again, this episode gallops towards its conclusion, which is a very Star Trek reset. But again, because DS9 inherited a lot of Next Generation tropes and a lot of the writing staff from Next Generation, it's definitely one of those things. Yes, as he points out, lack of consequences. It is. This is DS9 still finding its feet and still feeling like at the end of each episode we need to kind of
have a hard reset.
Exactly, back to the status quo. I'll push us along. I have to be the bad guy as always, I'm afraid, and shove us along. But Bashir is attempting to explain the virus with a lot of techno waffle I've written. And I think
I've written down that the Cardassians all will build distinctive monoclonal links into their DNA.
Bashir, Dr. Bashir. And Cisco just cuts across him and is like, please, bottom line it for me. And it's like, yes, I love that sequence. and credit to Bashir, he rallies instantly and he's like, this isn't a Cardassian virus, it's Bajoran, which I felt was like a fun little twist. Oh, wow.
It is, yes.
You would absolutely believe.
Because I think they find that the module was placed on the ship 18 years ago.
Back when DS9, then Terok Nor, was built.
Yeah, exactly. And when it was a Cardassian station. So it makes complete sense that it was a Bajoran activist who was trying to attack it. Albeit failed until Miles O'Brien came along, fixed the replicator. And linked it into the system, allowing the virus to be. It's just so neat. It's just all the pieces fit together, and it works with the history of the station. And it's just so satisfying.
It is, because they could have said, oh, Ducot left it. Last time he was out, and you'd be like, oh, those pesky Cardassians. I don't think it needed. You could have believed the episode would have run okay if it had been a Cardassian attack.
It could have gone exactly the same, yeah.
But to make it Bajoran, that kind of introduced a new level of complexity. And you're like, oh, wow, we're still finding these landmines from this conflict. And I just found it added a little bit of extra depth that made me a bit more immersed in it. I hope you... Well,
I've very much appreciated that as well. And it keeps that. I think last time Izzy said there is no black or white in DS9. Everything is grey. And again, we've got the Bajorans are now considered to be the good guys. They're on our side. The Federation are working with them. But in the past, many Bajorans have committed acts of terrorism against the Cardassians and against others. Absolutely. And this keeps that alive in the script. It was a Bajoran trying to sabotage the station that has now caused this virus, which I think by this point we've also learned that if it's not remedied within something ridiculous like 12 hours.
That's right. Yes, 12 hours when you finally enter the final stage.
Everyone breaks a fever and everyone will die.
Yes, absolutely. And I just have in my notes here as well, Odo always being the voice of encouragement. oh, what if there's no antidote? And it's like, wow, okay. Always looking on the positive side there. Thank you.
But they do a genuinely good job of ramping up the tension when we know that this
I
is
found
early
that.
into a new series of Star Trek. It's extremely unlikely they're going to kill any or all of the major characters, but they do a good job of making it look and feel dangerous,
Yes.
which is great.
I think the best thing a show like this, where it's always going to be recurring, is make you think, how are they going to fix this? Because we know, yes, the cast has to return. This is Star Trek, so it's always a case of challenging exactly how it's going to happen. Izzy says, is Odo the only one unaffected? No, Quark does indeed have a very resilient immune system, and later will return. Yes, Indoor Cat points out, yes, Quark thankfully will be our angel of mercy in the hour of need, but there's all that to come. I quite enjoyed Kira's research, combing through records, interviewing people, digging up the records on who we later find placed the virus there. This Deacon Elig, and a little bit of behind the scenes trivia. The profile of Deacon Elig that's pulled up. The picture is of VFX guru Dan Curry, a member of the crew who did all the special effects for TNG and on DS9 and on Voyager. And
that's delightful.
It's just a wonderful little bit of behind the scenes. Yes, the picture is of Dan Curry, who is a very important part of the behind the scenes Star Trek crew. So that is
fabulous.
A wonderful sequence. But I did love that now this is a rare example of Kira flexing her intellectual muscles rather than just punching people and shooting people, which is what we've seen.
And also her knowledge of Bajoran systems, because when she's trying to chase down Deacon Elig over the years, he used to be in a penal colony. It's closed. Where did he go after that? And she has to use her knowledge of Bajoran administrative structures. She first tried looking in the northwest sector. Okay, tried the administrative offices in the northeast sector then. And no one else could have done that. She knows how the structures work and how you need to search through them, and she goes to it. It's nice. She isn't just, random person, go and resolve this. She is the only one who can do it thanks to her background.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. I loved that. I loved it. It gave depth to Kira's character, and it reminded us that there was this complex Bajoran society beyond, and there was a little bit of world building. Some of these people were in prison camps, there were escapes, there were deaths, there were murders. There was all of this commotion that makes it very hard to track what's going on in Bajoran society. Once again, it's good deep world building that comes across in just a couple of lines. So I really appreciated that. We then jump. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep pushing us ahead.
That's all right.
We cut to a very abandoned Quarks again, and it is just Quark spinning the Darbo wheel. And I love that Odo comes in and admits, in a very rare episode of honesty, that he does not know how to gamble, despite having presumably spent years in the bar watching people gamble.
How exactly has he been policing this bar when he doesn't know how the gambling works? How is he going to know if someone's cheating?
That was my question. I really wondered about that.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it's a lovely little scene between him and Quark. And Quark obviously has a similar response to us. You've been here all this time and you haven't learned how to gamble? What the heck?
Excuse me. It is a wonderful question, I suppose. Oh, excuse me. The Indocat points out, I suppose it's not Odo's job to monitor cheating. My theory would be, yes, there is cheating. It's Quark cheating his customers. But Odo should know that, and he should be able to police that. But I guess they were trying to, introduce a light-hearted moment, which is that Odo does not know.
It's very nice. And it's a nice, calm, quiet moment in an episode that has a lot of dialogue, a lot of action, a lot of people trying to resolve things, and suddenly you've got this just a couple of minutes of two characters talking about gambling in an absolutely otherwise silent casino. It's nice. It breaks it up slightly, and it keeps those characters inserted in the episode. It's not all functional pushing it forward, even though it's so short and so quick and so tight. I just love it. It's just a really nicely scripted episode.
I'm so glad you thought so. I also loved the contrast. We see Quark's quiet, then busy, then quiet. We're getting a feel for what this place is like, and it's those wonderful contrasts. It's not like 10 Forward, which always felt to me like very much like a stage. just full of background characters, and a slightly unbelievable. I never quite gelled with 10 Forward. Was Quark's
Yeah, you
Bath
don't quite
was
get a sense of what people are doing
no,
there. They're just sitting around with drinks in front of them while the real action happens on the one
Yes,
table the
absolutely
cameras are
right.
pointing at. Whereas, yeah, this is a place that people move through, where things happen, where the background itself is
So
part of the
glad you thought so.
storytelling.
I'm so glad you thought so. Yes, love that character set building there for Quarks. We return to sickbay when Bashir is very tired, trying to resolve this virus, and we see the screen. We see the words on it change, which I think is again
Yes.
a rarity for Star Trek at this point. They very rarely show us what's on their screens. They're usually, vaguely generic L cars, computer screens from the Enterprise. But now we see the words on the screen become this indecipherable.
Gibberish.
Yeah,
Yes.
I loved
Yeah,
that.
it's lovely. We get to share that character because I think for the most part the camera uses the third person view where we don't look at things from characters'
Yes,
point of
you're
view
absolutely right.
unless they're passing out or there's something particular happening to them that say when Georgie's looking through his visor and describing
Yes.
to someone what he's seeing. But yes, here we get to see the screen through Bashir's eyes and get to see from it going from admittedly not very comprehensible medical jargon
Yeah, that's a
to
good point.
just absolute nonsense poetry.
Okay.
Again, I've written it down, so I'm going to say because it's fun. It says, excuse colour away, right 49C, contact mind straighten, unsaid negligent, gold window, hinder squad performance, then loud bush, it went grey relish, equal hook, growl, rope, slash honeymoon, dolphin sky drum. It's weird language. It's not even everyday vocabulary that they've chosen. And I love that when Bashir first starts speaking, he starts speaking with the virus. He says, computer replay morning. Computer says that it didn't understand the command, so he says, glass lunch, judge a bin to let it. I'm certain they put the word bin in there because he's very, very English. They wanted a piece of English vocab in there just to emphasize it.
I hadn't picked up on that, but I think you're absolutely right.
I think they had a lot of fun while writing the
I think
nonsense
they
dialogue,
did.
while keeping it very serious. I think even though the
Yes.
characters are spouting things that could be risible in many circumstances, because of the context, it stays very serious. There isn't. I'm laughing at it now because I love the way they've written it, but at the time he's going, "Oh no, it's him as well. Oh no, the doctor's got it. How's it? Oh no, and he can't use the computer." It's genuinely tense.
You're absolutely right. It really does. I think once you lose the medical officer, Dr. Bashir, you think, well, who the hell else could fix this now? It's a wonderful, as you've pointed out, it escalates the action really tightly in this episode, and I feel like that is the ultimate. Because we've come to rely on McCoy and Beverly Crusher and Pulaski even to, pull a medical solution out of the hyperspray, and now no Bashir, no solution, right? So
Yeah, he was searching for an antivirus, an antidote for the virus rather, and he was the only person aboard who could. And now
exactly,
his work's suddenly arrested. He's got to stop.
exactly. I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
And after that, I think we cut to Jahil's ship at the docking port. The guy who right at the beginning was saying, "But my cargo is going to expire within 48 hours if I don't get away from this station." And he is now transported himself onto his vessel.
Yep.
He says, "I'm going to warp." I think he's discussing with he's talking to Cisco, who has put a comm link to him to tell him, what the hell are you doing? You're quarantined. You cannot leave. And he says, well, I'm going to half warp. And he does. And because he's set his ship moving, the docking clamps, which are holding his ship in place, I like that Deep Space Nine has docking clamps on the edge of the ring rather than a large docking bay into which ships have to travel. It means that they don't have to have a large hangar space on the edge of the station. They've just got ships go up and just go, and they're attached, and then they can transport themselves on aboard. But because he started pulling away, Cisco says, well, we're going to have to let him go, release the clamps, and then we'll pull him back with a tractor beam once he's gone. But because he's already got such tension on the clamps, one of the plates on the ship is buckled. The clamps cannot be released because they've been warped. And if he continues to do this for any amount of time, his ship's going to explode and take half the docking port with it. Oh no. So in the midst of everyone has this virus, suddenly there's going to be an explosion as well. And it fits with the story because we've already seen that the guy's in a desperate state and it makes sense that he's trying to get away now.
It is both a believable and a terrifying escalation of the tension.
Yes.
And
it's a new kind of threat. You've got the medical threat and now, boom.
Exactly. Once again, this episode is ramping up. It really leaves you kind of stumbling along in the background going, well, how are they going to resolve this? I also liked that it was quite jarring because the only people in ops are Cisco and Odo, who very much says, I can do security. I can't do star-based operations. What are you talking about? And Cisco's like, listen, I've got nobody else. You're going to have to. And I did just make a note that Odo uses a console like my parents using a computer. He hunches over it and he's peering and
I didn't pick up on that. That's
stabbing
lovely.
down at the console. I loved it. It was such a tiny and yet utterly believable sequence of Odo poking and pecking at the keys with this really tense look on his. I mean, kudos to Rene Auberjonis, who plays Odo through that mask. He nonetheless wonderfully emotes this, I am not in my comfort zone pushing buttons in ops. I love that scene so much.
It's brilliant. And what else do I have down about that one? No, I'd actually written down everything that I had about that scene. Are you happy for us to bob onwards?
Absolutely.
The next thing I've written down is apparently you can transport someone against their will.
So this is it.
What?
So, yes, Kira, just before all of this, Kira is one of the remaining few staff who still is functioning and has a lead on Dr. Cermak Wren, an assistant of Deacon Elig, who originally built the virus, and Cermak Wren has already gone, well, I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking about a bomb on your station.
Yeah, she tries being sensible, calls him from the station, and he's just like, I don't know what you're talking about. I wasn't involved by.
An incredibly unsympathetic response, I thought.
Yeah.
And Kira, of course, brilliant problem solver's like, I'll tell you how I'm going to fix this. Cisco, let me have a runabout. I'm off to go and talk to him. And Cisco's obviously understandably, I can't let anybody leave the station. You've been exposed to the virus. You're probably infected. And she's like, I'm not going to take it to Bajor. I have a plan. I will not go to Bajor. And it's Odo who says, you better let her go, Cisco. And I was like, wow, this is really out of nowhere kind of advice. It's just like, I like that, that Odo's like, I trust Kira to resolve this. You should let her go. And Cisco just goes, nothing to lose,
In the first
right?
episode, we've had it built in that Odo and Kira know each other well. They've worked together for a long time. They trust one another. And that's, again, been reinforced here. Odo being the one to tell Cisco, no, you better let her go. She's what other chance do we have?
I love it. One line builds that, again, another brick in the wall of this really strong relationship between Odo and Kira. Loved it. And off Kira goes, takes the runabout, rings Ren again, and he's like, we're not having this conversation. And she's like, I just need to know you were in your office, and beams him up. Incredibly ballsy move.
We probably have seen it before, but I can't off the top of my head recall an instant of someone being kidnapped by transporter link. I think I had assumed that there had to be some kind of technical buy-in from the person being transported. They've got the comm badge on, they've got something to identify them. But no, apparently you can just take a shuttle above a planet and just sweep people up like a UFO.
So I do feel it's one of those things that's a little bit grey and like kind of the writer's rules. But I think an agreed Star Trek convention is shields stop transporters, transport nullifiers stop transporters. Nothing else. Or being quite far underground, There are various things that can interfere with the signal. But if there isn't anything and you're just in an office, in a building, on the surface of a planet, there is nothing to stop you being swept up by a really angry Bajoran in a spaceship.
And I guess it tells you something about the nature of dynamic security in Federation space, that there isn't something mechanical to stop you from kidnapping people from random planets. It is just understood that does not happen. People will not do it. We can trust members of the Federation to behave well towards each other.
But you're on Bajor now.
Yes. But yeah, still, Bajor doesn't have any measures to stop people.
It does not. So Ren
aboard the ships, which is good. Which is a good thing in this case, because now Kira can for the first time acknowledge that breathing into another person's face is problematic,
I love
actually. She brings him aboard and says, well, why would I help you? So she takes her face really close to his
Yeah,
and
right.
says, well, I've got the virus. Now you have to. Will you help yourself?
And I love that Ren actually twists his head away like that's gonna make some difference. He's like, ugh. It's like, mate, you're in this very small, basically space van. No, you are totally exposed. You can twist your faces away as much as you want. But I also love as well. That I love the way it's framed. That Ren is very much kind of out of focus and in the background, whereas Kira is center. And looks fantastic. Obviously, Nana Visitor, beautiful actress and brilliant at her performance. And in that scene, I just see this incredible energy, which is, guess what? If I'm going down, you're coming down with me. And she just hits him with it. And I'm like, oh, that's a brilliant performance. I love that.
We see her anger. She's a very angry character with a lot of good reason. But it seems to be her go-to. I think there are lots of emotions a character can go to first when under stress, and for her, it always seems to be anger.
100%.
Coping,
100%.
yes, pushing forward, but she's angry. She wants this guy to help, and she's now succeeded in persuading him while looking absolutely enraged with the dude.
Absolutely, 100%. So hopefully we have a person to help us now, and as they make their way back to the station, Cisco is in ops and starts to lose his ability to communicate and succumbs very quickly to the fever stage. He's almost very quickly unconscious, leaving it to Odo, the only person left standing in ops, begging for help, and who should arrive but Quark.
It's lovely. It puts out a call over the station-wide comm saying, "Can someone please help?" And then Quark just walks in. He's very pleased with himself.
He does. And obviously they've got 5 minutes to get down to Jahil's ship, which is still trying to pull away from the station and will explode in 5 minutes.
Someone needs to prevent it from exploding while still attached to Deep Space Nine.
Still attached. Horrible tension. And obviously the only way to get there is to be beamed. And Quark's like, I worked on a freighter for 8 years. Transporting's fine.
I've seen this happen a bunch of times.
As Odo is on the pad and he goes, wait, you've never done it? You've only seen it done?
I think Quark actually waves at him.
He says energizing in a way that patronizes every single TNG scene where O'Brien, bless his heart, had to do it. And away, with one hand raised going, wait, Odo is away, thankfully deposited by the freighter. And I love this little sequence in the airlock. It's very claustrophobic with those lovely thick rolling doors. There's fire. Jahil unconscious on the floor, and it's very tactile. Odo releases a door. There's a great big clamp. He has to pull a massive lever, and this huge clamp rolls back.
Yes, because am I right in thinking he's trying to release the engine at that point, so the engine can travel away from the ship itself?
It is the clamps. He has to manually release the actual clamps, so the whole ship can then be pushed away. And in a show which is normally dependent on people just pushing, coloured lights on the screen,
he's there turning levers with visible effort. It's very unusual, and it is lovely, and it reinforces the urgency of the situation that he's having to use his own bodily strength to do it. Yes.
And Quark is bleating over the PA, "You've got 30 seconds, hurry!"
I really like the urgency in Quark's voice, because admittedly, part of the docking bay is going to be destroyed if this thing goes off, but I assume that Quark back in ops is actually quite safe. He's going to be all right. He's worried about Odo. He's really worried that he's going to lose his enemy friend. I
think you're absolutely right. I absolutely think you're right. It's still very early in the development of DS9, but I believe that is a fair observation.
And he shifts tone very, very quickly when it becomes apparent that Odo has released the ship in time. He and Raheel, I think they don't transport straight back into the ops room, because he continues talking with him over the communicator, and Quark very quickly shifts to, "Oh yes, we'll discuss my fee later." And Odo just,
it's wonderful. It's a wonderful kind of breakneck contrast between action and comedy, and I think it works really well, and it establishes those two characters.
And it's those two characters performing those actions. You couldn't have substituted any two other characters and kept the dialogue the same. It's them and their relationship, and I just love how tightly that is written into the action in all of these sequences. Each character is very much themselves, and the people they're interacting with are dependent on their relationships with them. It's the opposite of lazy. It's very finely honed.
It is, and I love that it's so early as well. This is what, the 4th, 5th episode of the 1st season. We've barely just gotten to know these characters, and yet already we're like, yeah, only Odo and Quark could do that. Like, we've known them our entire lives.
Which you have by this point. You've known, well, for a good portion of your life, you've been familiar with these characters. But yeah, I've only been with them for a handful of hours, and already I feel I've got a good grasp on them.
That is exactly the reaction I was hoping and praying you would have, that you would come at this and feel the same impact that I think a lot of DS9 fans have, which is that this show does characterization very, very well. And I like to see it land like that. When somebody like yourself, who has no prior knowledge of DS9, has come into this and just gone, I buy these characters. I believe that's how they would act in those situations, and I think that's right.
Yes, yeah, and I don't know how much of this I will pick up on if I weren't trying to analyse each episode as I go, but I'm just so impressed by how much there is in each one, how much they manage to get plot and tension and character and moving the story forward and world building, the history of it all as well. Every word is necessary and meaningful and entertaining. It'd be a delight to deconstruct in terms of how do you put a good plot together, but importantly, it does what it's meant to do. It keeps us entertained and wanting to see more, which makes it very hard to watch one episode a fortnight.
So yes, harking back to our last episode when we discussed how long this endeavour is going to take us, yes. Kat and I are observing one episode every couple of weeks, mainly to maintain our own fatigue levels. But I do appreciate you restraining yourselves, and I hope you can appreciate what it was like as well. When this was being syndicated in the mid-90s, when I first started watching it, it was 1 week, and then I would have to wait until BBC 2, 6 p.m. next week for the next episode to happen.
Gosh. And in terms of being able to rewatch it, you can see the BBC 2 reruns a few months later, maybe. But you could have a VHS tape and record maybe 3 episodes max onto it. But unless you've got a whole shelf of VHSs, you just watch each episode as it comes, and it's away again. You can't go back and check things. You can't. It's extremely different from how I feel about television now.
It is remarkable. It is very much a representation of that previous time when it was not binge watch, slam a box set in a weekend. It was, you watch an episode, you discuss it around the water cooler, which is a very old, TV concept.
Which I think when you've got a show like this, and like Babylon 5 as well, they have but Babylon 5 I'm more familiar with. It has the overarching story. It has a 4th season. It was meant to be 5 seasons, and they cut the funding, so they had to make the 4th season super fast. But they had a 4th season arc written from the start. There are callbacks in season 4 to the very first episodes of it, and it's natural because that's how it was scripted. And people had to watch it 1 episode at a time each week, then find out whether the next season was going to be funded or not. Whereas I've been able to watch Babylon 5 by watching multiple episodes in a sitting, so I can see it playing out. I can see the callbacks. So it must have been a challenge for fans of TV shows like that, and a challenge to try and get execs to see TV in that way, rather than anyone can watch an episode and instantly pick on what's happening. How do you build the history into it such that people will keep watching and remember and stick with it? Deep Space Nine does something very different from the previous incarnations of Trek, and I'm glad that they did, whether because they ripped up Babylon 5 or not.
Again, that question has never been resolved, and I will encourage people to go and look it up and form their own opinions. But yes, the crossover between the seeds that became Babylon 5 and the seeds that became DS9 are very mingled in a garden of uncertainty.
But I think I feel now that I'm watching DS9, it is so deeply rooted in the world of Star Trek. The characters are extremely different. You can draw parallels between Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, but I feel that Deep Space Nine is different enough, distinct enough, and entertaining enough. It doesn't feel as if it's a pale shadow of something else. It feels like it's very much its own thing, even if it maybe took crib notes from Straczynski's work. It might not have. internet rumor states, don't sue us. Is Berman still alive?
We are but humble reviewers, please. We have no money. Spare us, internet lawyers. Spare us.
It's not worth suing us. We can't afford it.
Oh, this is exactly it. This is exactly it. But I loved your observation that, yes, Babylon 5, wonderfully pre-prepared by... and I love Babylon 5. And Straczynski had this wonderful vision, and he built it into the show from the beginning.
Yeah.
The contrast with DS9 is that they had to overcome, as you correctly observed, the exec's resistance to arcs. They wanted a show like TNG where people could jump into an episode and pick it up there and then. The writers, and I'm going to credit Ira Stephen Bear and Michael Piller, wanted a show that would actually have these overarching elements that you would need to keep following. And so they actually had to overcome that resistance to begin with and build a show up from there to have an arc. Straczynski gave the creators a show with an arc from the beginning and made it fly. So DS9, if anything, had to overcome a greater obstacle in my eyes.
Yeah.
And hopefully by about season 3, season 4, in however many years that will be, we will start to observe, that there are threads and themes that you suddenly remember were introduced a long time ago, and it was the writers planting seeds that they never were sure were going to pay off because the execs might have slammed the door shut on them. So I always feel like DS9 had a bit of a harder time because it didn't have a blueprint. It evolved naturally to have arcs. But once again, your impressions, Kat, of the contrast between B5 and DS9 will be very interesting. I have really the only thing left in my notes is, yes, a brief log entry. Once again, I feel like DS9 uses a log entry to sum up a lot of things that might have taken like 10 or 15 minutes in an episode.
Yes.
It's Cisco just saying, yep, Dr. Wren devised a treatment and we treated everyone and everything's fine and back to normal.
Oh, Dr. Cermak, because he's Bajoran, so his
Sorry, you're
first name
absolutely
is
right.
Cermak.
It's Wren, yes. Dr.
So Dr.
Cermak.
Cermak.
His first name is Wren because it's his last name. Thank you, Kat. Good Lord. This is the problem with Deep Space Wine. If I have wine...
Yeah, the wine and the linguistics.
I'm going to blame the aphasia virus. Window gleaming open.
Last station was.
We should try and factor in like the effects of an episode into our commentary, see what it's like. But to return us to reality, they very quickly wrap up and they're all in ops. Cisco orders the coffee. It's too hot, I guess. Aye, chief! And they end on a joke. And I'm like, I appreciate that you had to get back to the status quo, but that kind of felt a little bit jarring.
And it's also... I'm reminded of my impression when I try and watch 3 of the Aliens films in a row. First film, Ripley being tormented by aliens. Okay, she gets to have a really long sleep before the second film, then tormented by aliens. Then the third film, she lands on a prison planet, gets attacked by the prisoners, and is then tormented by aliens. And my feeling by the third film, marathoning them, is just, can you just give the woman a break? And Miles O'Brien has spent 24 hours fixing everything around the ship, then had a life-threatening virus, and then gone straight back into fixing everything around the ship. Just give the poor dude a break. Cisco, let him sleep.
Welcome to Deep Space Nine. Torture the Irishman.
Suffer the little Irishman. Come to Deep Space Nine. It
is awful, and it does. I mean, you're absolutely right, and you observe slightly an emerging trait, which is that it's very interesting in the Star Trek universe to get the everyman, Miles O'Brien, a guy just who has a job and is not a bonded alien or a super doctor or an angry Bajoran freedom fighter. He's just a guy. And they're like, great, let's give him the worst things to deal with. That's no spoiler. That's just because, I will remind the audience that Kat is in a lot of meme groups, and that means they've seen a lot of memes. So they have a very interesting approach to Star Trek. So there are certain things that I don't think will be massively surprising to you, and one of them is that. And this is the first example of it. It's horrible.
Oh, dude. What I really hope for O'Brien is that his relationship with Keiko remains okay. because there are so many episodes. Whenever he and Keiko are on screen, a lot of the time, not all the time, a lot of the time they're arguing, or one or the other of them is upset about something. I just want to see Miles O'Brien happy, just for a few minutes.
I don't want to spoil anything.
can't
I don't want to
promise that.
spoil anything.
No, that's fair. That's reasonable.
It-
Oh, the other thing that I forgot to
Yes.
mention, it's really fun when Kira gets back to the ship, to the station rather, having been on the shuttle, and the person who greets her is Quark. She's like,
Yes, I have that in my notes. Yes, I think we would all be in that situation. You radio ops and Quark's voice comes out and it's just, oh no, oh, this is the
why the hell are
worst.
you here? Because he's the only person aboard the ship that still has the power of speech.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
And also just the plot point that that Dr. Cermak manages to build an antidote so quickly, despite his actually not having worked on the virus before, because he works from Bashir's notes.
Yes.
That where Bashir got up to before the aphasia struck, that's all still in the
Very
computer for him
helpful.
to pick up and work from there. So it fits together. It works. It makes sense. It doesn't feel as if anyone's wearing plot armor. The commander of the ship gets the damn virus and is at risk of death. No one is safe, and yet it works because people have the skills and they bring them, and it makes in-world sense. It's just so satisfying.
Oh, isn't it?
I've watched so much bad television, and this is it. This is wonderful. It's just so nicely done. I've said this too many times now, but I'm just really impressed by how well the plot fits together. Oh.
I am so glad, and once again, I think that's a huge part of why we're doing this podcast, which is you have no reason to think that. You have no prior invested value in DS9. You are approaching it as a TNG and original series viewer, so you have no reason to credit DS9 any more than any other installment in the Star Trek franchise. So your unblemished approach to the show is the most valuable resource we have. So thank you, Kat. I also hope you will retain that when we hit episodes that are simply not as good, because they're out there. Like every show and every installment in Star Trek, there will be episodes that are simply not as good. So we look forward to getting your.
I look forward to mercilessly comparing the worst episodes with the best episodes of Babylon 5.
oh, you wound us. You wound us.
Oh, in the chat, the indoor cat has just pointed out that when she comes back, Kira has the things have really gone to heck if Quark is the one saving us. Yeah.
It's so true. Excellent observation. I thoroughly agree. So we are once again.
Just one other thing. I'm just going to read the last of my notes now. The episode very briefly had two female characters discussing something other than a named male character. So technically, this episode passes the Bechdel test because it's got Dax and Kira discussing whether or not it's a good thing to have the attention of men. It's not the best, but it gets there. And the show does have good female characterization. And the female characters do play large roles in each episode. They're not just there as partners or adjuncts to the main male characters, which I really appreciate.
Absolutely. It's something that I think we will always have to keep an eye on, because as exemplary and as exploratory as DS9 and Star Trek is, it will still fall into a lot of the same traps that mid-90s programming does, mid-90s writing. This is something I know we both want to explore, which is we are looking at a mid-90s program from 21st century, more enlightened times.
Thank
you, and I'm glad you've noted that. And this is something we want to keep an eye on, because yes, DS9 has a few female members of the main cast, but not loads. Kira and Dax. So let's keep an eye on it and see how these characters have developed and how they interact with the rest of the crew. And let's not be afraid to highlight when the writing is not complementary to it, because that's what we need to do. We can't fall into this trap of rose-colored visor and see it only as our model portrayal, because it won't always be, and it's our job as reviewers to highlight that.
Yeah, we've got to be cruel as well as kind.
100%. I have hit the end of my notes. Do you have anything?
I think I've just got a couple more bits. Just
Please.
Noting that the episode is obviously named after the Genesis story from the Bible, Genesis 11:1-9. Babel was a tower whose builders were trying to reach God and who were cursed by each being given their own unique language to speak, meaning that none of them could understand one another, and they were then scattered across the world, which is the biblical explanation for why we have multiple languages on our one planet under one God. So it was a very well chosen name for this episode, where each individual character gets their own individual language and no one could communicate with one another. Low lights for me in this episode were just the terrible lack of quarantine protocols, which we've covered.
Yes.
And also that Garak isn't in it.
Yes.
They introduced Garak, and we've now had like 2 episodes where there's either zero or minimal Garak. And I'm just like, when's Garak coming back? I want my favourite little guy back on screen, Tim. Where is he? Where have they put him?
So I will manage expectations. I will also just say good evening to Tony Girl, who thanks me for my Oda impression, and will I be turning into a chair? Wish I could. Wish I could. I will do next time. To manage Kat's expectations, the writers had no idea the gem they'd unearthed with Garak, and if my records are correct, Garak will not return this season.
There are so many episodes, Tim.
I know.
How do you make a Garak and then forget about him?
I think the writers hit season 1 with about 10 or 15 stories they wanted to write and then filled up towards the end. Still world building, and simply did not think that a supporting character who had been in a few scenes of season 1 would come back. They were testing things, seeing what would work. They did not realise until season 2.
They made that very clear.
They will, I guarantee you, make good on
I'm just gonna have to headcanon insert scenes where the characters go and visit him for genuine tailoring needs.
100% I would recommend that, and there are both novels and fan fiction that will absolutely support that need. But yes, it's a reminder that DS9 is an emerging show, and they honestly did not know what they had on their hands and did not know what would work. So we will have to wait a while for Quark to return. We will not have to wait too long for Q to appear.
I know. It's the one after next. We've got one more episode to do, and then I get to have more Q, and then I can be hideously disappointed by the Q episodes. I've been building it up in my head far too long now, Tim.
I appreciate that. We talked about this, about the lack of Q in DS9 compared to every other Star Trek show, except for original series. And
one Star Trek show, The Next Generation. Yeah.
Well,
and he turns up in Voyager, which comes a bit later.
He does, but we've already discussed about the commitment to reviewing DS9 and then Voyager will basically take us a good couple of decades, easily.
Yes.
2 decades at our current rate. So let's not go bothering trouble and concentrate on what's coming up. So yes, we shall return in a couple of weeks' time with the next episode, which I believe is Captive Pursuit. But that is all to come. Any kind of closing thoughts, Kat? Anything you want to kind of point out that we haven't yet covered?
I don't think so. I really enjoyed it. I think the virus was very clever. I think they probably had a linguistic consultant on it because they did it really well.
Yes.
I really enjoyed this episode, and I think I had a lot more to say about it than I would have expected from a Monster of the Week versus a big relationship building, carrying the plot forward kind of story. I really enjoyed it. I want to see more.
I'm so glad to hear that. And yet I did think, once again, I thought, we'll get through this one fairly quickly. It's a bottle episode with a crisis. We'll get through it fairly quickly. No, 1 hour 20. We've been on talking about it.
I'd like to see if we get as far as the final episode of DS9, whether the length of our podcast episode remains stable or whether we're just like, okay, this week they did this. I hated this. I liked this. See you, Tim.
Bye. 7 minutes. Catch you next time. It will be very interesting to see. Absolutely. Right. Well, Kat, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to Chat and Izzy and the Indoor Cat for being our backroom ensigns, keeping the technology moving. Yes, let's aim to return in a couple of weeks' time when we will discuss episode 5 or 6, whatever it is, Captive Pursuit. And this episode shall appear on YouTube as soon as I can get around to editing it, which basically means chopping the start and end and not cutting a single line, because I think everything we say is gold pressed platinum.
We're valuable.
Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Kat. Take care.
Thanks,
and we'll see everyone again very soon. Good night.
See you in a fortnight. Bye.